Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I am one of your three hosts for today, John DeLynn. It is July 26th, 2022, and we are here back again for another monthly episode in our wonderful series featuring the John Larsen. Today, the topic of our discussion is church versus the gospel, the infamous Poelman talk. And joining us as always for these series are the John Larsen from Mormon Expression podcast. Hey, John Larsen.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us, brother.
It is my pleasure to be here.
And of course, we have the Carah Burrell or Nuance Ho joining us from Studio Burrell. in an undisclosed location.
Yeah, here I am from my own home studio. How do I look, guys?
Epic.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you guys. Yeah. So, all right. So it's been about a month since we did what I think was a really epic, important episode on the toxicity of the Great Salt Lake. I want to talk about that a bit, but before I do, John, I'm going to let you lead the kind of like the intro announcements or commentary.
Sure. If you remember, I pledged that I would address issues that come up or things that people say. There's a couple that I want to address. The first one is I've received a couple of messages and people have posted on the board saying something to the effect of, I'm really worried about John Larsen and that he might blow a gasket. And people legitimately concerned for my health as I rant and rage on the interwebs. A couple things I'd like to say. When I do these podcasts, I do not suppress my emotions at all, which took me a lot of practice because I grew up as a white male in the United States. So I was trained from a little early age to suppress my emotions. So you're getting the raw of what I'm feeling, which is why sometimes my language is a little coarse or whatnot. But I don't spend time doing this outside of this. As a matter of fact, sometimes in the pre-show, John or Carah or somebody say, did you see this thing that happened? Or did you hear this? And the answer usually is no, I haven't heard about any of it. I tend not to stay plugged in to the church and these things for my own mental health and well-being. But when I'm not doing this, I spend my time outside. I listen to the birds. I watch the trees. I watch the sunset. I look at the stars. We live in a beautiful place and a beautiful planet, and there's a lot better things to do than this. So I would say for everybody who's going through the process of processing the church, either you're still in it or you're partly in it or your family's in it or whatnot, it's important to get outside. It's important to do something else and to maintain your mental health. But thank you for those who are concerned. And that's one of the reasons that I left Mormon Expression in the first place. And I meter very carefully how much I engage this world because it's important to take care of our hearts. But
so you're saying we shouldn't worry about you because you practice self-care?
I try to. Yes. Yeah.
You titrate your Mormon engagement. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. That's a good way to put it.
All right. Carah, how about you? Are you titrating your Mormon engagement?
Yeah, I think I also echo what John just said. Come run the hidden pine trails of the forest. Come taste the sun-sweet berries of the earth. Come roll in all the riches around you, and never once wonder what they're worth. So just when you're really stressed out about Mormon stuff, think of Pocahontas lyrics. Go outside, and you'll be fine. That's what I also practice.
It all comes back to Disney.
It all comes back to whatever Carah can reference for the millennial audience.
All right. Yeah, you guys grew up watching Disney movies, didn't you? The millennials.
Yeah.
All right.
But
my second thing. Thank you. My second thing, people have asked me, we talked about the lake last time and climate crisis and that sort of thing. And so people ask me in different forms, what can I do? First of all, I'm not necessarily an expert on climate change or whatnot. And some people have asked me about how I decided to move. First of all, that process took me 5 or 6 years of very careful thought and planning. careful consideration, all that stuff. So it wasn't anything I entered into lightly. And I would say if you choose to become a climate refugee, I wouldn't count myself as a climate refugee, but if you choose to become one, be very cautious and be very careful. Don't make that decision in haste. Think about, where you and your family want to be. Take into consideration all the factors. I have a list of a whole bunch of factors I used. If anybody really wants it, they can send me an email at john@johnlarsen.org or send it to Mormon Stories, and I'll be happy to forward that along. But more importantly,
I didn't tell you this, but I had someone email me and say John Larsen's episode inspired us to sell our house, and we're moving to Michigan, and we're going to homestead on the frontier in Michigan. That's a true story. I'm not making that up.
Whoa.
Send them my way. We'll talk. We have 3 acres out here that we're involved in, all sort of that kind of stuff. The next thing about what you can do. Actually, the front line of climate change, there's trying to get the big organizations and the big who's it and what's it nots to change. I don't have any faith that they're going to change, because we'd have to change the entire capitalistic system, our entire system of governance, and the way corporations approach profits. Color me skeptical. But there are an increasing number of local groups that are banding together, because none of the political parties in power right now in the United States apparently want to make any sort of significant change with climate change. So there are increasingly community groups that are joining together to exert political pressure. So if you're into politics, I am not. I find it frustrating. I find it maddening. I don't get involved that way. There are community groups out there who are advocating for the kind of thing that you want. And the great thing is, there's some of them that are a little bit conservative, and some of them that are a lot conservative, and some of them that are very liberal. You can find your people, because this crisis, this planetary crisis where we are in Act 1 in, is impacting us all. But there's some little things that we can do. I volunteer at the local university to get involved, boots on the ground, with the ways that we are working on climate change. One of the things that climate change has already precipitated is the ecosystems that you are living in, no matter where you are in the United States or in the world, have already begun to change. There are new pathogens, there are new nematodes and insects and diseases that are vectoring to places they weren't before. There are insect populations being impacted, and there are little things you can do. And I'm going to give you all one of the best, easiest, littlest things. I'm sorry. Bees need flowers, and they need flowers all the time, not just for 2 weeks in April. So if you have any property, I don't know why I'm emotional. I'm sorry. I apologize. If you have any property, what you can do is get local is better, but you can talk to your local nursery and find good plants that aren't invasive, that aren't impactful to your local environment. And you can plant flowering bushes and flowering flowers that are in bloom all year round. Now, there's not really a single bush that's in bloom all year round, but you can plant them throughout your yard, so there are flowers continuously available in your yard. The bees need those, and the other pollinators need those. And that's a simple way that you can help, because those populations are declining. But the setup a long time ago was the land grant universities in the United States. Usually they're the state colleges, like Oregon State, Washington State,
Utah State.
And these universities, part of their charter was the federal government assigned them to help local agriculture and gardening. There's one in, I think, every state. They help people like do their check their canning seals and things like that. These people, these little old ladies and men who are volunteering, are the ones on the front line cultivating new plants that can survive your climate. They're doing things to attract insects that they're needed. They are working on ways that we can keep our food stock running. And there's not very many of us. So so there's plenty you can do. Don't feel helpless.
Beautiful.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. It's beautiful to see how passionately you care about these things. I mentioned last episode when you brought to me the idea of the Great Salt Lake. I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't know why we were talking about it, but I trusted you. And not only was your episode very well received and has gotten a lot of coverage, but I noticed that the daily podcast from the New York Times just last week. Well, one thing I noticed, John, is that the day after our episode, the LDS Church released a press release talking about that they're going to conserve water. Now, of course, we know that the PR machine in the LDS Church grinds slowly, and I guess there's a small chance that our episode, maybe there's no chance, but maybe some would say there's a small chance that our episode influenced the timing of that article. But I was just glad to see the church enter the ring a little bit. But I was even more glad to see that the daily podcast, which is probably one of the top 5 podcasts in the world, just last week did an entire episode on the toxicity of the Great Salt Lake, which makes you a prophet, John Larsen. I'm just going to say it. You can reject that term, but I'm going to use it anyway.
I'm just one voice of many. And the more we can make noise, the more we get people paying attention. Because unfortunately, it's right now, it's easy in the United States to ignore what's happening. We get involved in Netflix and whatever else, and it's easy to just pretend that the things aren't changing. But they are, and they're going to need all of our help. So, yeah, please help. Okay, the other thing was there anything else you wanted to say about the episode in the Great Salt Lake?
Carah, anything you were thinking?
No, I'm just grateful that we did it, and I really love the passion that John Larsen has for the state that he doesn't even live in anymore. That there's still people that are going to be affected by the decisions that are made right now forever that we all love and care about. Even if we all move away from it, there's still going to always be people that live here, and yeah, the solutions need to happen. So we're making noise about it. I love that. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, it's my home, and I hope there's nothing in the podcast where I sounded derogatory towards the state. It really does break my heart what's happening there.
Yeah, mine too.
Shout out to my friend Scott Purvis, who says that they just bought an old house on 2 acres and they're planting their orchard and gardens. Love you, Scott. And Mark Crispin says John Larsen has a heart of gold. So we're gonna show that.
Oh, thanks. I'm kind of a dick, though. I will be honest.
Oh wait, we're not swearing this episode.
Oh yeah. Scratch that. I'm
by your request, not mine. I don't want people to get mad at me. John, tell people why it was your idea to maybe keep to keep this episode PG rated.
So the PG rating request came from me because over the years I've always had people say to me, "Hey, I want to play your podcast for my mom or my grandma, but your filthy mouth prevents me from playing for these sweet ladies." So I thought this one is a good one to play for people who don't have the stomach for the kind of brash, in-your-face language that normally pours forth out of my mouth.
Now, the problem with that, John Larsen, is that every episode we have like 10 people saying, when are the F-bombs going to drop? So what do we do for the people who are here literally for the F-bombs? What do we do?
They're just going to need to edge this show.
They're going to have to what?
Nothing. I gave you a dirty joke. They're just going to need to wait.
I thought that's what you said. Carah, Sonny's excited to have you back.
Thanks, Sonny. Everyone's so nice. Love you guys.
All right. Okay, John, what's really quickly, Carah, I just want to give you a chance to just for those who are joining us new, let people know who you are and kind of what you do, because we want to support creators whenever we can.
Thanks, John DeLynn. My name's Carah Burrell. I co-hosted MormonStories over the last year, and then I decided we parted ways in March. I've been doing TikToks for over a year or two now. I find myself to be a comedian, or try to be. That's how I met my husband, and comedy is a part of my heart and soul. So I try to go back in my lane of talking about things about ex-Mormonism, leaving the church, faith deconstruction, Mormon history, with kind of a satirical comedic lens. So I have a YouTube channel, Nuance Ho, and my TikTok channel, my Instagram, and a Patreon. So people have come out and supported me on all of those platforms since I left Mormon Stories. So I'm so grateful for that. And I really, really love helping people with their deconstruction process, answering questions about church history, researching things. And so I'm just very, very lucky to be one voice of many in this space of so many creators who are helping people do probably one of the hardest things they'll ever do in their lifetime, which is deconstruct what they were raised in, what all of this mess of Mormonism is, and help people find a new, happy, healthy path out of it. So that's what I do.
Beautiful. All right. Support Carah. Support Nuance Hope.
Thanks.
All right. Hey, I get to pimp myself a little bit today.
Pimp away.
I uploaded my first video to YouTube, and we posted a link.
I'll post a link right now, but we also will include it in the show notes.
So my YouTube channel is unadorned, as is the video. It just sort of starts and stops. So I gotta do some work on that. But I know people sometimes complain they don't want to hear me talk about anything but bashing on the church. But in this particular one, a evangelical radio host and preacher had put out an article in the Christian Post, in which he was saying, honestly, he asked 7 questions to atheists. He wanted to have an honest dialogue with an atheist, and he posted 7 questions. So the video that I posted is my response to said evangelical prophet, pastor, whatever he is. So go check it out if you're into such things.
And that's super cool. You've got a new YouTube channel. I'm noticing that we have 9 subscribers. So here's the deal. We have 347 people joining us. I want to challenge should we say 200? I want to challenge 200 of you to tab over to YouTube, find John Larsen's YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and then come right back. And we did just post a link in the comments if you want to just jump to that. But let's support our content creators, and no one deserves to be supported more than John Larsen, except for maybe Carah Burrell.
Thanks.
Well, you guys are doing all the hard lifting. Send your dollars and support to things like Mormon Stories.
All right. All right, Big John. Any other announcements before we start?
No, that's what I had. Let's get going on this famous talk.
All right, I'm giving you first chair now.
Oh wow, you did. I rotated up into first position.
You're in first position.
Wow.
There's a quick question. Austin wants to know, John, if you plan on uploading videos regularly.
That's my hope.
Okay. What frequency are you shooting for?
I don't know. Maybe weekly. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have lots of thoughts on different things, but my goal is to annoy everybody. That there's something that I believe that everyone has a problem with, and just this lane doesn't give me enough avenue for offense. So I have to expand my little offense wings and fly.
Hey, don't be stepping on my brand. Just kidding. Watch out.
I don't know.
Nice.
I don't want to commit, but hopefully, sure. And if you send me a response video, I'll respond back. Why not?
I love it. All right, John Larsen, take it away. What do you got for us today?
Okay, so there is this rather kind of famous incident among people who are pariahs of the church who like to study such thing, and we want to talk about it. This involves a emeritus, well, not an emeritus anymore, a member of the 70 named Ron Poelman. And Ron has passed away recently. He lived to a ripe old age of 83. And he was called to the 70 in 1978. Prior to that, he was vice president and corporate secretary of Consolidated Freightways out of San Francisco. And he spent 26 years there. And then he became a general authority in the church. Elder Poelman was both a lawyer and an MBA. And he is a smart guy and very precise in his language. And this is going to come up here over the next hour or so. He gave the talk that we're going to talk about in 1984, and he was promoted to the presidency of the 70 in 1986. I think he later served in the general Sunday school presidency. So there were no negative ramifications for him in his church career with the events that we're going to talk about, nor would I should say, should there be. So what happened in 1984, Ron gave this great talk titled "The Gospel and the Church," and he gave it in conference as you would expect. And then shortly thereafter, in the next few days, the church had him go back into the tabernacle, and they dimmed all the lights, and they had him re-record the talk. They had him change the talk, and we're going to go through exactly what changes were made, and we're going to speculate as to what was going on. And they did it in such a way as to try to make it look like they hadn't changed anything. So they added a cough track, famously, and we're going to show you clips. We're going to show you side by side. We're geared up, John. This is we're moving forward in technology, right?
Yeah. And do you mind if I add a thought or two? I hope this isn't already what you were going to plan on talking.
No, go.
So Carah, let me Gen explain you. Is that okay?
What else would I expect? Could you resist?
So once upon a time, Carah Burrell, a long time ago, there were no smartphones. And even before there weren't smartphones, Carah Burrell, there was no internet, believe it or not. And even before then, Carah, there were no personal computers. And before all of that, okay, whenever the church did general conference, the only way it could get broadcasted into the wards and stakes was through these massive satellite dishes that were positioned at every stake center. But unfortunately, there were always people who couldn't attend general conference for one reason or another. So, Carah, there are these things called VHS tapes. Now, I'm just kidding, because I know you recorded VHS videos in high school. That's one of the fun things that I know about you. But
yeah, I'll be like Gen Z explaining what like camcorders with an entire VHS tape. That's what I grew up on, is like
throwing your shoulder out with the weight of the VHS. Anyway, what they would do is after general conference was over, they would have recorded all of the general conference talks, and they would ship to all the wards and stakes, all the units and branches, these VHS tapes so that people could watch back the addresses. And so, John, when you talk about the fact that Poelman gave a really amazing, groundbreaking talk in general conference, that when you say that they edited it, what they did is, when they, tell me if I'm right, when they shipped out the VHS tapes to the world, they went in and had Ronald Poelman record new footage as if he were presenting at general conference, cut out parts from general conference, spliced in parts from the re-recording, and then shipped that in the VHS tapes as if it was the original general conference talk, without any notes or without any notification that this sort of hand-wavy action, this sort of George Orwellian kind of like 1984 hand-wavy censorship had taken place. Is that right or wrong? Did I get that wrong?
That's correct. They re-recorded the entire talk, so they pulled the old footage out, and they put the new footage in. But,
okay, got it.
But the rest of it was straight up. And this is the age when early audio AV files would buy a VHS recorders, they could record TV. So back in the old days, your aunt used to record episodes of MASH on VHS, so she could. I was gonna say that was the early version of TiVo, but I don't think TiVo makes sense to people anymore.
So TiVo had a window to record it. You had to press the play button and the record button at the same time. If you wanted TGI, like it was, Full House, Urkel, TGI Friday, like you wanted the whole like ABC lineup. That's what I know. So
In
I was
my
definitely
house,
during that era. Yep.
we recorded Friday night videos and of course Saturday Night Live. So that's how we got to see Saturday Night Live, is because we'd record it and watch it Sunday morning after my mom and dad weren't paying attention. Okay, so
On board.
yeah. Hence, and you see what became of me.
I was going to say that's the beginning of the end of John Larsen right there.
So this broke in the news. I'm not sure who broke it first, but everybody ended up picking up Salt Lake Tribune, Deseret News. It was all over at the time. It became a big story, and there are 2 links to Sunstone articles that I've linked out there. One that tells the entire story of this. If you want to read the backstory and what happened and who did what and who said what, I'd refer you to that Sunstone article. It's marginally interesting, but only to wonky people. And then we've linked to another episode that has the side-by-side comparison, another article in Sunstone. And that's what I'm using as my text. It was the October 1990 edition of Sunstone. The name of the article is The Editing of a General Authority. It is out there. If you want to follow along with us right now, you can go Google it. And it was edited by the great Eugene Peck, one of the great scholars of the time.
And I have an early Mormon Stories interview with Eugene Peck, so we're going to have Maven add that to the show notes, because Elbert Peck was a legend. He's still alive, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, really? Okay, fantastic.
I think he's still alive.
Yeah, Elbert Eugene Peck.
Yeah.
This leads us to the famous talk. Well, let's give the church response first, because why did the church say that they re-recorded it? What was their defense? Because I want to put this out there as we go through the talk. I want you all to sit with it to think about how much this rings true. The church said that his words, Elder Poelman's words, might be misinterpreted by fundamentalists and polygamists to justify that sort of right-wing edge of the church. So they said, in order to keep that from happening, that's why we edited it. Now, what's fascinating, if you've known anybody who works in the church, I've known people who worked in the church translation department. I've known people who worked at Deseret Book. I've known people who worked around this stuff. Everything gets scrutinized to a high degree. When I became involved or knew about the church translation department, it was because of my mission, where I spoke Laotian in the early 90s. And I knew the Laotian translator, and he'd been doing that stuff for a long time. And the way the talks go is they have to have all their talks submitted to the church. I don't know when, but the translators get them a week early. So they have a week to try to work out and look up in the dictionary whatever kind of weird terms. You used to get the old general authorities to get up and talk about running combines and threshers in Idaho. Or my favorite one came up when I was a missionary. They talked about pulling hose in Idaho. And that doesn't necessarily translate around the world when you talk about pulling hose. Or pulling pipe, I guess. My Idaho
laying pipe and pulling. That's not the way to go.
Laying pipe and pulling pipe are 2 different things.
You're right.
All right. So,
no comment.
So the talks had to be very carefully vetted. So it's not like they just let anybody come up and say whatever they want. So this must have jumped some kind of kerfuffle around there to get them to actually go to the lengths they went to get this talk edited. As far as I know, Ronald Poelman never said anything negative about the process. I already said his church career was not negatively impacted. And I think he said, I wanted to clarify what I was trying to say. So I'll leave that for you too. Is Ronald Poelman clarifying in 2nd edition, or is he changing?
Yeah, people in the church always like to have different definitions from what the dictionary definition of words are, don't they? So clarifying, I'm excited to see what he means by that.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, there's a couple of...
Were you going to mention the cost of this re-editing?
Oh, they said it cost more than $10,000 to do it?
Between $10,000 and $15,000. And I guess it was Peggy Fletcher Stack that originally reported on some of this, which I think is interesting. And also in this, I'm reading the Sunstone article, you linked us to it. It also talks about you mentioned fundamentalist groups. Is that right?
Yeah.
The Peggy's article actually makes it a little bit more broad and says Mormon apostate groups, because honestly, I could see them being concerned with this talk about the progressive and liberal crowds as well. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they actually had the Sunstone dialogue crowd in mind with these changes too. What?
It's possible. At this point, 84, Sunstone's starting to get a little pariah-ish. It was what, 90? When was it? 90?
September 6th.
Was it September 6th? And I think 92 was Packer's talk where he identified what, intellectuals, feminists, and what was the other one? I don't know.
Ace, feminists, and intellectuals.
Yeah. As the three great threat.
Yeah.
So obviously the ideas that of the liberal Mormons being a nuisance were percolating out there.
Can I ask one thing that I was always kind of like vaguely understood, even as a believing Mormon, that like all of the talks, not only are they pre-approved like a week in advance, but how much of what we're talking about here, of these conference talks, are supposed to be like word for word guided by the Spirit? You know, we're supposed to look up to these men or women, if they're giving talks in positions of authority, that this is exactly what God wants us to hear. How much, I mean, culturally, I don't know exactly what's the understanding with how conference talks are like words from God. You know what I mean?
Yeah, good question. It's kind of like the loose versus tight translation problem. Are they getting inspiration? And if so,
yeah.
Why do we need it edited and sent to the correlation department first? And if it's not, then yeah.
I remember literally one of the early cracks in my testimony when I was in high school was learning that the general authorities read from teleprompters during general conference. And I thought, because my dad had always taught that a really righteous sacrament talk is led by the Spirit, and you don't read anything, you say it from the heart, guided by the Holy Spirit. So my dad kind of set me up for some disappointment when I then found out that Spencer W. Kimball was just freaking reading from a teleprompter. That was a blow to me, believe it or not.
Well, you know, not all of them read from teleprompters. Ezra Taft Benson never did. He always read from the notes in front of him. Brothers and sisters. Page turn. Read the Book of Mormon. It is the page turn. He must have written in like 48-point font those things.
Is that an SNL skit that you just performed for us? That was perfection. Live from New York. It's John Larsen.
Free. John's interpretation of Ezra Taft Benson.
Hey, this is my cousin. You be nice to my cousin.
Well, Benson, we need to talk about Benson at some point. If you're defending Benson, John, we need to have a talk.
No way.
He was a lovely human being, I'm sure.
No, I'm not. I'm not defending Taft Benson.
Okay. All right. I want to before we get in, because we talk about, and I don't like this word, even though I'm going to throw it out just because it gets thrown out a lot. We talk about things like brainwashing. And this is not brainwashing, and there's not really, that's sort of something that happens when you're stuck in a dungeon in North Korea. But indoctrination is a real thing. And to me, this is an example of how indoctrination works. So I want to put some frameworks for you all as we start getting into this. First of all, I want to talk about linguistic relativity, which is sort of this idea, also known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that the structure and definitions and grammar of language influence the way we think. That by learning a certain language and how it refers to things, it actually shapes the way you process the world. These thoughts were later organized and developed a little bit more by two scholars after Sapir-Whorf, named Lakoff and Johnson, who wrote a famous book, Metaphors We Live By, who explored this idea further. So the idea that the word choice we use, what we decide to say and what we don't decide to say, the theory is that can carefully structure the way people think. And that I would contend that high, what do you call them? High contact religions, John? What's your word?
High demand religions.
High demand religions engage in this sort of language manipulation a lot. And we normally don't get to see it happen because it happens behind the scenes. And here is this golden opportunity where they rip the lid off for us, because we have the pre-version and then we have the correlated version. And we get to see the inner workings of the hive mind of the church, which is why this talk is so fascinating. I'm going to say this up front, and I'm going to say it again. I think Poelman's original talk was great. I think it's a good talk. And I think it has application outside of just the church. So I think everybody who is connected to Mormonism should read and listen to the original talk. I also think that the how the church changed it is very, very instructive as to how the church processes the world. All right. There's one other construction I want to put up here. I'm sorry, all this pandemic stuff. We need to talk a little about Plato and Aristotle, right?
Of course.
It's been said that there was Plato and Aristotle and everything else is a footnote. So the Platonic view is that there were these forms that existed out in the ether somewhere, that we had, our souls were in touch with. And we recognize things as they conformed to the form. So if you are walking through a room and you see a chair, according to Plato, you would recognize that as a chair in as much as it conforms to this ideal heavenly chair, that the idea that is already embedded in your mind. And Aristotle, his protege, said, no, you're exactly 180 degrees wrong. What we do is we see multiple instances of things people sit on. We learn that the word is called chair, and then we extrapolate an idea of the chair from our encounters of it. And the debate between these two frameworks has been raging for a long time. Those who are of a religious bent tend to be Platonic, and they tend to view heaven and God and Jesus as these kind of Platonic forms of the ideal person, the ideal whatever that we're trying to recreate, we're trying to get to. And of course, if you've listened to me, you know that I'm more Aristotelian. I don't think that there's any sort of magical chairness floating in the galaxy that we extrapolate those ideas in a Sapir-Whorf sort of way. I would believe that the linguistic relativity also comes with what you encounter as you extrapolate. But I just wanted to lay that out because it's really important as we look at what Poelman is doing here, because it depends very much on a Platonic view of the world. And that's where I want to kind of come back to his talk. Again, a brilliant man. And this talk has application just more than outside of the church. Okay, we got a comment.
Got a super chat from David Charlesworth. He writes, the Poelman talk edits just show how Mormon leadership suffer from insular leadership. They do not have anyone around them that gives them direct, harsh feedback. Hence, you get the Poelman talk edit fiasco. Thank you, David Charlesworth, for your donation and for a great comment. And also thanks, Scott Collier, for your super chat as well. We rely on those super chats and those donations to make sure Carah and John get paid for their work. So thanks to everyone, including to Cynthia as well. All right, John.
All right. With no further ado, let's take a look at the start of the Poelman talk.
Okay, and John, do you mind if I kind of describe the video and the audio that people are about to see or listen? Is that okay?
Yeah, I should have gone over that. Please do.
So, part of me was tempted just to play the entire talk. Now, John, you decided that probably wasn't necessary.
Well, it's a conference talk, so we didn't want to all fall asleep. I just got to the good parts.
Yeah. So what those of you who are watching are going to see, and those of you who are listening only, don't worry, because I think you'll still be able to grasp what we're going to be playing here. But on the YouTube video, you're going to see a shot of the original talk on your left, and then a shot of the edited talk on the right. And then down below, you'll see a transcript of, reflecting what's said. And it's going to be pretty obvious visually when the text corresponds with the original talk versus with the edited talk. But what's going to be confusing to some who are just listening is there's going to be 2 audio tracks that are playing. One is of a slightly different pitch than the other, and sometimes they play kind of almost in an echoey sort of simultaneous way. And I think that was done intentionally to help people be able to follow the tone of track 1 versus the tone of track 2. But, we'll make sure and pause every, we've only got about 5 or 6 of these clips, and we're going to take time to explain, what the original text said and what the change was. But hopefully, you all will catch along. And if you're listening only and you have a way to jump to YouTube, you might get more out of this episode. And I'll just say one more thing, just as a plug for YouTube. People don't understand, I think, that if you subscribe to YouTube, they just pay like $10 a month. You, number one, get rid of all the ads that they play. And number two, YouTube lets you play their videos as audio only. So you can lock your screen and play a video, but just listen to the audio. And that's a super useful tip for people that just want to kind of podcast a YouTube video, but don't want to have to keep their screen open and on and unlocked. So consider, you get so much benefit from YouTube. If you've got a little bit of cash, throw some our way, throw some Carah's way, throw some towards YouTube, and you'll benefit from the no commercials and the ability to podcast the YouTube episodes. All right. Anything else you want to say, John, before we launch in, or Carah?
That was great. I just want to reemphasize. So the video we're going to watch, and thanks to the individual who did this, took the recording of the live broadcast and then the re-recording and did them side by side. And if you search on YouTube for 1984 Elder Poelman talk, or and it's Poelman, and we have a link to it here. You can see it. We're going to listen to 5 clips. I will try to give you the start time. I invite all levels of scrutiny to go look at these videos. I want people to understand we're not making anything up. This is out there, and we're just going to dive in. So I think first clip begins at 0. Carah?
Did you say it literally took place in 1984?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. That's a great point, Carah.
The church is like, now or never. Wow, erasing history. Interesting.
Yeah, it was October 1984. Good catch, Carah. That's brilliant. That's why we have you on, Carah. That's brilliant. Yeah.
The jokes make themselves. Continue on. I mean, I also just wanted to add from that super chat that we had earlier about how devastating the church has this problem of not listening to people. And then they have this hive mind that John was talking about, that they're making these group decisions without enough exterior agitation of like, is that actually a good idea? And I think we've all been in situations where we know that like you need a little bit of outside agitation with people who are in positions of power. Some smaller guy standing up and saying, hey, I know I'm a nobody. I know I'm the intern around here, but could we take a second to actually see what the ramifications are going to be of that? When you have a very dogmatic authoritarian system, like the structure of the church that just got this patriarchal structure, this press forward at any means necessary kind of thing. If you don't have reforms within the system, way to actually make meaningful change, you're going to have this kind of mess up. And you're going to have people like us talking about it. And unfortunately, I think that's why I was pointing during that time, pointing to John Larsen, pointing to John DeLynn, because as much as the church might not like people like them or people like us, agitators need to exist within the system to bring awareness to how things change. It's only when you bring awareness to the change that's happening that dogmatic systems that don't like reform actually end up reforming and then bettering the people who are supposed to be served within that system, within that church, the membership at large. That's my
Amen. Thank you, Carah. Oh, and by the way, John Larsen, your YouTube channel has 80 subscribers now. So we increase your subscribers by like tenfold. I want to keep encouraging our viewers and listeners to go subscribe to your channel. I want to get up to 200 by the end of this episode. We've got 500 people joining us. So everyone click on the link we just shared to John Larsen's YouTube channel. Do yourself a favor and follow John Larsen's.
Also Nuanso.
And Nuanso, absolutely. All right, let's Carah, add that to the links as well. All right. Should we
I'm not in the
okay, I'll do it. All right, John, should we play the first clip?
Let's get rolling.
All right, let's get rolling. This is the very beginning of the talk. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Both the gospel of Jesus Christ and the church of Jesus Christ are true and divine. However, there is a distinction between them which is significant, and it is very important that this distinction be understood. And there is an essential relationship between them that is significant and very important.
All right, John Larsen, that's a little bit hard maybe to follow. Tell us what we just heard.
So what you had there, if it sounded like he was echoey, and I noticed that when he first started the talks, he was spot on exactly in cadence. So they were playing the first 15 seconds there. That was both the talks playing simultaneously. And then what you heard is the first version in which he says this. So he says, both the gospel of Jesus Christ and the church of Jesus Christ are true and divine. That's how he opens his talk. And he said, however, there is a distinction between them, which is significant. Yes, Carah.
No, I'm listening.
Oh.
I'm literally trying to follow because the nuance is so like razor thin.
There are processes with her hands. She kind of
I
goes
do.
this and this and this.
So there's a difference between them, which is significant, and it is very important this distinction be understood. So what he's saying up front is we have both the church and the gospel. And there is a significant difference between them, and it is very important that it's understood. That's the opening to his talk. But the edit says they got rid of significant and they changed the word to essential. There is an essential relationship that is very important. So his whole talk was based on the difference between the church and the gospel, or the earthly form of the church, which is in this world and perverted and polluted by sinning human beings, versus the gospel, which is the pure thing that God has. And what they did is they erased that distinction right there in the first sentence.
So what he's trying to do, and I think this is going to come out of the next clip, he's trying to set people up to not be disappointed and say that there is there's a distinction between the gospel and the church. They're both true, but it's important to understand the differences. And in the second edit, they're basically saying that they have an essential relationship. They're de-emphasizing that there are differences. Is that right?
Yeah, the relationship is essential and significant and important, but not distinctive.
So they don't, I guess from this, John, tell me, and Carrie, you're welcome to react and summarize as well. But I guess what I'm taking from this first edit is they don't want us thinking that the church and the gospel are different so much. That in their minds, they want us to think of them as the same.
Yeah, there's no difference.
There's no difference. Okay.
Sorry,
that already sounds not very strategic in my mind.
I want to return to that point much later in the talk, because there's some points where strategy for the church and what's going to happen in the future kind of play out a little bit. But
I won't
good early catch, John. All right, so the next clip we're going to pick up is just right. It's just the next thing that he says.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get the right. Okay, so all right, let's play the next clip.
Of equal importance is understanding the essential relationship between the gospel and the church. Failure to distinguish between the two and to comprehend their proper relationship may lead to confusion and misplaced priorities, with unrealistic and therefore failed expectations. This in turn may result in diminished benefits and blessings, and in extreme instances, even disaffection.
Okay, pause.
Okay.
Of equal importance.
Wait, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So what we just heard right there was the original talk, and now we're gonna hear the modification in a second. But I think it might be easier to follow if I point out what he just said.
Yeah.
Okay, so understanding this essential relationship between the gospel and the church is important. And he says failure to distinguish between the two and to comprehend their proper relationship may lead to confusion and misplaced priorities with unrealistic and therefore failed expectations. If you believe the church is the gospel, then he's saying you're going to get confused. You're going to have misplaced priorities. You're going to have unrealistic expectations, and those expectations will therefore fail. Elder Poelman is spot on. And he just described the arc that happens so many times when people get disillusioned when they discover that what they've been taught in the church and what is actually happening in the church do not line up. So Ron Poelman, his first argument is, if we do not make this distinction, if people can't tell the difference between the divine gospel of Jesus Christ and the operations of the church, then you will have failed membership. The church obviously did not like that paragraph. Let's see what they approved.
Understanding the essential relationship between the gospel and the church. Failure to distinguish between the two and to comprehend their proper relationship.
Okay, we're getting the same thing again, but we'll keep going.
Sorry. Misplaced priorities with unrealistic and therefore failed expectations. This in turn may result in diminished benefits and blessings, and in extreme instances, even disaffection.
Understanding
Edited.
the relationship between the gospel and the church will prevent confusion, misplaced priorities, and failed expectations, and will lead to the realization of gospel goals through happy, fulfilling participation in the church. Such understanding will avoid possible disaffection and will result in great personal blessings.
Okay, so the heart of Christianity is always, hey, if you do what we're asking, we'll give you lollipops forever. That great rewards are in store. And I want to point out two things that he says. The proper relationship, although he doesn't define what the proper relationship is, will, if you understand the proper, and proper means orderly or what has been dictated. But he puts the promise up there that if you understand the relationship properly, then you will be happy and you'll have full participation in the church, and it will result in great personal blessing. This is one of the worst mind tricks that these kind of organizations, these kind of churches do. What they do is they say, our program works. And when our program works, it makes you happy. It makes you genuine. It's lollipops and roses. But if it doesn't work, if you're not happy, it's you. There's something wrong with you. You don't understand the proper relationship between the church. Notice that he's just putting it out there as some kind of vague sort of, hey, you got to understand this relationship. But they don't put it in as any kind of hierarchy. They don't establish that the church is less than the gospel, which is what Poelman is arguing for in the first cut.
So, John, I'm understanding why you talked about Aristotle and Plato, because tell me if I've got this right, John, and I'm sure you're going to illustrate this later as well. That if there's this Platonian, is it Platonic good that's in the ether?
Mm-hmm.
Is he basically likening that unto the gospel, which is pure and good and righteous and true and perfect? The gospel's perfect. It's out there somewhere, but the church is our best attempt at understanding what the gospel is, but we all see through a glass darkly. And so it's better to have lower expectations for the church, but to still hold on to the gospel as being true and perfect and good. You can simultaneously do both. The church is the chair, which is imperfect, and the gospel is the ideal chair that's somewhere out in the ether that's Platonic. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So then that's what he's saying. I think you said it very well. The church is made of flawed people in a flawed planet that is fallen, and it's going to have problems. Right? But don't let those problems dissuade you. We're striving to recreate God's kingdom on earth by following Christ's gospel, by following this ideal that Jesus Christ set forth. And we're going to fail. And we're going to fail at it. and not make it there. And he's saying when you start thinking that the church is actually the gospel, then its confusing points, its failures, its absurdities will trip you up. That's what Ron Poelman is saying. But the church comes in and says, oh, there's a proper relationship. Proper by who? Well, if you read the rest of it, it's proper by how the church tells you. The church tells you what the proper relationship between the gospel. And he's going to make that point more explicitly here in a little bit, that it's the church who intermediates. The problem is the unedited version gives people agency. And he's going to say that directly here in a minute. And the church doesn't want that. You do not have agency to determine whether or not the church is true or not. You can only listen to the church on that. And when the church is false, well, now they're true because they identified they were false before, but now you're bound again. You're never allowed to exercise any agency when it comes to determining if the church is true or not. A problem which Ron Poelman, being a Ivy League educated lawyer, could pick up on. Carah, you look concerned.
I am following with just like every brain cell firing right now. Like really, really, I feel like I can be smart. Right now I feel dumb because I'm like, I think I'm following. So dumb it down for me. But that was perfect. I'm getting it. I'm following. Go on.
Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to, before we get to the next clip, there's something he says. And this is the unedited version. He says, the gospel of Jesus Christ is a divine and perfect plan. That's my Platonic gospel, right? It is composed of eternal, unchanging principles and laws, which are universally applicable to every individual, regardless of time, place, or circumstance. Okay, that resonates. The principles and laws of the gospel never change. Okay, so the edited version says, the gospel of Jesus Christ is a divine and perfect plan. It is composed of eternal, unchanging principles, laws, and ordinances. So they inserted where before he said principles and laws, a law like thou shalt not kill, a principle like love thy neighbor. But the church, when they re-edit it, inserts ordinances. And again, the church is always its own worst enemy. If the church had realized in 1984 that they would be continually mucking with the ordinances, they would not have said this. As a reminder, when you went to the temple in 1984, one of the things you did is you symbolically cut your own throat, and you symbolically cut your own chest open to receive your bowels. It was a Masonic order that was there. I feel free talking about it now because the church has sent it down the memory hole. There's no evidence other than the fact that there's millions of people walking around today who went through the temple who actually saw it, that it was there.
And some YouTube videos.
Oh, we have the old Saints Alive produced a version of that back in the day. The principles and laws of the gospel never change, he says on the unedited version. And then he says, gospel principles never change. So they're talking here about the ordinances and giving themselves more authority. Because if you think about ordinances, well, that's something that's very church. The church administers the ordinances because we have access to the Holy Ghost. The church has never claimed you can't access Jesus Christ and his love or whatever. I guess maybe sometimes they do, but that doesn't. But the church can control the ordinances. So they need to make sure that we understand that ordinances are not part of Poelman's church. They're part of Poelman's gospel.
Got it.
Okay, let's go to number 3. Now, we're going to give you a big quote here that comes from the unedited version that they just don't address in the second one. So you're going to be hearing the first unedited version.
Yeah, they cut a big chunk out, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, here we go.
Sometimes traditions, customs, social practices, and even personal preferences of individual church members may, through repeated or common usage, be misconstrued as church procedures or policies. Occasionally, such traditions, customs, and practices may be even regarded by some as eternal gospel principles. Under such circumstances, those who do not conform to these cultural standards may mistakenly be regarded as unorthodox or even unworthy. In fact, the eternal principles of the gospel and the divinely inspired church do accommodate a broad spectrum of individual uniqueness and cultural diversity.
I'm going to pause there. Is that okay, John?
Yes, please.
Okay. That doesn't mean I wanted to force my commentary if you wanted to say something first.
No, go, John.
Yeah. So this is really ironic because what I see them doing here is they're saying sometimes people confuse social practices, conditions, and customs as the gospel or as church policy. And then sometimes these customs or traditions or practices can be regarded as even eternal gospel principles. And then he goes on to make this point about orthodoxy and unorthodoxy. And basically what he's saying is if we don't learn to tease out cultural things and opinion and imperfections from the gospel, then we set ourselves up to be kind of policing boundaries and deciding, which things are eternal principles, like, not drinking Coke. Like, I remember growing up, there were these families that would just never drink a caffeinated beverage. And to them, that was, co-equal with the atonement as almost one of the most sacred principles of Mormonism. And by confusing cultural practices with doctrine, they were then using that as a way to judge and eventually marginalize other members of the church that may just have a different approach to caffeinated beverages. And he's saying that certainly can't be a good thing. We want a big tent where lots of people feel welcome. And more importantly, we don't want to be prideful and pointing our fingers at other people. And we certainly don't want to be nudging and pushing people out, people who are showing up and engaging in the gospel. Now, that's what I understood from that text. Do either of you want to add or correct anything I said?
No,
Go
ahead,
for it, John.
Karen.
Oh, I was just going to say that is a really refreshing. John Larsen at the beginning where you're saying that you really like this talk. And I was like, well, see, I really like this talk. I do think that, there is a big tent Mormonism that I'm seeing here, a very Sunstone Mormonism, more than one way to Mormonism, type of really friendly, open-endedness, and inviting spirit about this. And I'm really surprised because, just like John DeLynn was saying, I grew up in Provo, Utah, and very, very white, but everything about down to what we wore to church felt so culturally influenced. And there was a time when I was around a teenager when a general authority gave a talk about like not wearing shoes that look like you're going to the beach. And it was this whole big hubbub in my stake because there are so many Polynesians in my stake who wanted to wear sandals and flip-flops to church, but all the teenage white girls, then we couldn't wear them anymore. And it really started my wheels spinning of like, how much does any of this actually matter about like my relationship to Jesus Christ when all we're doing is talking about like whatever everybody is wearing. And that's just one issue of what people wear when they come to worship at church. But you can go into Coke, you can go into any different way where, garment lines, there's a lot of different ways that Mormons and just generally tribal instincts of seeing who's the most orthodox and who's not and judging people by exterior things. And I think that's really interesting that he's asking us to really think critically about if it matters and to make that tent bigger. So
it's a brilliant paragraph, and I agree with you. The unfortunate thing is it existed for only 2 weeks in October of 1984 before it was snuffed out, and it was removed from the talk wholesale. But there's a couple elements I want to emphasize there, and you guys did a great job of pointing those things out. Sometimes tradition, custom, social practices, and personal preferences of individual church members may, through repeated or common usage, be misconstrued as church procedures or policies. Ron Poelman was a lawyer, and a good one at that, clearly. He was giving the church exactly what it needed in 2016. Because the church has long had this sort of love affair with right-wing politics. And after the Republican Revolution in 1994, the church carried the books of Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity and those guys in Deseret Book up until the 2010s. I think it was probably 2014 or 15 when they pulled them out, when things started heating up even more. And the problem is, I think that as Trumpism and MAGA came in, you had a lot of Mormons who, in the beginning, and this is a matter of record, during the election cycle, didn't Evan McMullen or McMurphy,
Egg McMuffin.
He got a lot of votes, a significant number. He didn't win it. Trump won the vote, but he got a huge number. And if you remember, I think it was Sean Reyes, but I'm not clear on that, had started the new drug campaign in 2015, 2016 about pornography. So one of the big priorities of the conservative wing of Republicans that happened in Utah was really concerned about pornography and its effects on society in 2016. Then in strolls Donald Trump, a man who he himself and his wife had both appeared in pornography. So the Republicans had a problem, and the church had a problem, because the Republicanism and the church, if you haven't been in Utah or Idaho or Wyoming, it's hard to understand how hand in hand they are. During fast and testimony meeting, you will oftentimes hear Republican talking points repeatedly over and over again. And so what's interesting is Poelman foresaw that problem, that individuals may not be able to differentiate between the cultural practices of those around them, especially when they have bishops or stake presidents who are engaging in political behaviors in the auspice of their church callings, because they're not trained theologians. They're just lay clergy, and they bring whatever prejudices they have. And the church has been, if you read the Deseret News now, it is a war ground between Romney and Liz Cheney Republicans and the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. And the MAGA wing has a lot of political influence. Mike Lee and Bishop and Burgess Owens and Sean Reyes, and these guys are openly part of the MAGA movement. I'm not necessarily here to criticize the MAGA movement, except it oftentimes has priorities that are antithesis to the ones that the church teaches, like the stand on adultery or pornography, and those things kind of lost their wind, and the church lost some of its influence. Poelman foresaw that was going to happen, and had the church not edited this out, they could be referring to this now and saying, hey, because we all know stories of people in church right now who are in cultural battles between the MAGA arm of the church and the less MAGA arm of the church, and it's dividing stakes, it's dividing wards, it's dividing families, and the church has very few tools to deal with it, because it does talks like this where it removes the distinction between the gospel of Jesus Christ, the church, and the whims and will of your local leaders who have zero training. So an individual can't necessarily navigate, which is why I think Gen Z is walking away the church wholesale. The numbers that are given are about 80% are leaving the church, and the church does not have a corrective mechanism because they edited out of this talk in 1984.
John Larsen, this is great. Do you mind if I make a couple comments, and then Carah, we also want to hear from you.
Please.
So the first thing I wanted to say, John, is that it's not just an issue of sort of Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney Republicans versus MAGA Republicans. It's also an issue of Republicans versus Democrats. Because if you go to kind of the Pew data, the rise of the nuns kind of data, and you tease out why so many Gen Zers and millennials are fleeing organized religions, not just Mormonism, but organized religions in general in the United States, like rats in a sinking ship. Part of it is because they perceive that religions made, starting with Newt Gingrich, or even Reagan and kind of the 80s Republicanism, they perceive that Christians and Republicans made this kind of holy or unholy alliance where Republicanism became synonymous with Christianity. And that's fine if everybody agrees and if you don't mind your church shrinking. But as more and more younger generations lean towards progressive politics and liberal politics, which is just a reality that any good prophet maybe would have been able to foresee. But once you tie your religion to a particular political party, then even if only 30 or 40% of your congregations are the minority party, the liberal or progressive party, guess what? You lose 30 to 40% of your membership. And that is one of the main drivers of disaffection, not just from Mormonism, but from religion writ large, is that too many Gen Zers, too many Gen Xers and millennials have progressive politics, more identified not just with the liberal, Democratic Party, but with Bernie Sanders or others, and they feel like, well, my religion's too Republican, so I'm out of here. So it's stinging the church in more ways than just on the Republican side.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell you, I follow the evangelical and that Christian movement more closely than I do the church these days. And the same thing is fighting out, maybe even more so amongst them, as more and more evangelical preachers embrace basically what's emerging as Christian nationalism. And Mormons should claim they were the OG Christian nationalists, by the way. They've been squatting on that territory for a long time. But there's more and more of these congregations embrace Christian nationalism. They're losing the moderates, but they're also attracting people who really don't even understand Christianity very much from talking to them. They've clearly never read the Bible. They don't know what's in it. But they've got these American nationalistic, right-wing conservative points of view that are getting mismatched into a religion. And we're seeing the emergence of a new religious order, a new religious movement in American Christian nationalism. It'll be really interesting to see where the church falls on all this. I think the church is nervous. When a bunch of violent Christians get together, I think conservative Mormons tend to forget that Mormons usually don't fare very well in that equation, that these guys really, it's kind of like Hitler and Mussolini. Hitler was only tolerating Mussolini to protect his southern flank as long as he could, but there was no idea that the Italian fascist state and the German fascist state were going to hold hands and skip into the future.
Yeah. Carah, I want to get you in, but I also want to read a comment. Did you want to say a reaction, Carah?
To any of the moms and grandmas that we have been holding our F-bombs for, thanks for sticking around. Hope that you're finding this political conversation very invigorating. That's all I'll say for now. We've talked enough, but yeah, go to the next point.
I just wanted to share a comment that was made. It's a really important comment. The viewer is the Scotty's Mom Experience O'Brien. And they wrote, I'm wondering when this talk was given in reference to Boyd K. Packer's talk on the unwritten order of things. I wonder if one influenced the other. John, I don't want to talk about this talk unless you weren't planning on it. And then I'll make a comment now about it.
I don't have anything prepared about it. So go ahead, John.
Yeah, so this was just to that commenter, I went ahead and looked it up, and according to Google, the unwritten order of things was a talk given at a BYU devotional in October of 1996. So this would have been a good 12 years after the Poelman talk. But you certainly could take this talk as a reaction, as sort of the antithesis, or as the opposite of what Poelman was trying to say. Because Boyd, and you can imagine Boyd K. Packer being the one who came down on Poelman 12 years earlier, because what Packer ends up doing is giving this talk that says, yes, we all know that there's doctrine. Yes, we all know that the gospel is pure and the doctrine is pure, and that the church and the doctrine are one. But real Mormons, real Scotsmen, take it one step further and know that there are extra rules and extra ways where you're really living the gospel. Things like paying tithing on your gross instead of your net. And I think Boyd K. Packer would say passing the sacrament with your right hand instead of your left hand.
Wearing
Packer
a white shirt.
Yeah, wearing a white shirt to church. Exactly. Packer would say there's more doctrine than we even give doctrine credit for. We need to out-doctrine the doctrine.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that Packer represents the complete opposite view of Poelman. I would, just given the timing of this, and this editing the talk does not seem Packer's MO to me. I think he would respond a year later. This stinks of Hinckley to me.
Okay. Interesting.
So yeah. Let's sally forth. Let's go to the fourth clip.
Well, do we want to finish? I guess the whole point of the third clip was that they took out all that good stuff that we just talked about. Is that right?
Yeah. If you're queued up, there's just a little bit more. We can finish it.
Okay. Let me see if it's still queued.
The eternal principles of the gospel.
So this is the edited talk.
Implemented through the divinely inspired church apply to a wide variety of individuals in diverse cultures. Therefore, as we live the gospel and participate in the church, the conformity we require of ourselves and others should be according to God's standard.
Okay.
Oh, man, what an awful edit.
Does that just fill you with ick? I'm just like, give me another shower.
You want to share your reaction, Carah? Do you want to say anything about what you didn't like about that?
It's always just, I have a soft spot in my heart for people who understand the perplexing dogma and the orthodoxy that religion can so quickly be taken up in. And there are so many beautiful methods to spirituality. And the church, I had wonderful spiritual, quote unquote, experiences myself in the church. And when you take those spiritual experiences and they're conformed within a box, within now labeled that, like, the LDS church kind of owns those experiences. And now just the way that he described that, it's almost like those beautiful spiritual experiences that tie you to this religion that can be so meaningful and so purposeful, that drive you to live a better, more meaningful, service-oriented life. Like, that's the best type of Mormon that I was trying to be, right? But now it's labeled and now it's conformed within what he just described as like serving the church in this very orthodox way, without any of like the nuances of like your ordinances and your orthodoxy to the church is going to be through this very narrow lane. And just how opposite that feels to what Christ taught, what I felt spiritually within the church. And it just filled me with like an ick reaction. Like, if I was still practicing LDS, that would not sit right with me.
I think that I'm glad you played that, because there's a really sinister thing buried in what the church is saying there that reveals something I don't think they intended to reveal. So in the first version of Poelman, he talks about, hey, there's culture and that can influence people and they get it mixed up with the church, but culture and what human beings do is not the gospel. The gospel is never changing and attached to Christ. But what they say in the edited version is the eternal principles of the gospel implemented through the divinely inspired church. So again, we're elevating the church up, as opposed to saying what people do can be influenced outside the church. Apply to a wide variety of individuals in diverse cultures. it's like they didn't want to drop the word culture, but they showed what they really were, which is the church has always practiced cultural imperialism and cultural hostility. And they really don't care about people's culture, be it 100 years old, 500 years old, 1,000 years old. And those of us who served Asian missions struggled with this very much, because church, in my mission, individuals were restricted, or they could lose their temple records if they went to any Buddhist festival. Well, if you come from a country that has been Buddhist for 2,500 years old, they are all Buddhist festivals. So what we did is we cut the people off from their culture, from their people, from their identity, which is, of course, where cults want people. They want them broken and hurt and needing. And they just said it right there out loud. Church applies to a wide variety of individuals in diverse cultures. Poelman, in the first talk, recognizes this pancake layer of the gospel and culture and people and the church. Here, it's like, no, the church can come inside your culture and we can reach you directly, and you should do what the church says regardless of what your culture says. It's really quite insidious.
Wow.
It super is. And Carah, reminds me of an episode that I bet you count as one of your favorites that we did together, which was when we interviewed the Lamanite women, right?
Yeah.
And they talked
All
about,
time.
they talked about how they would force the Native American, Mormon young men to cut their hair to conform, the short hair. They would have them wear white shirts and ties instead of native clothing. And they would, to the point where, Sarah, my dear friend Sarah, would like rub lemon juice on her skin to try and make her skin, turn lighter, and she would stay out of the sun so that her skin would never darken. Like the ways that the church, or you could go to Latin America, John Larsen, instead of these beautiful native Guatemalan dresses or skirts, or the Native American garb, you've got them looking like little mini IBM executives, and you're taking out their wonderful musical instruments, and you're taking out so much of their culture, and instead replacing it with like a IBM McDonald's stamped version of like Beaver Cleaver 1950s Mormonism. That not only is it cultural genocide, but it's replacing it with something synthetic and unedifying and ultimately counterproductive to the church's own ambitions, I think.
And I think that's a key point that I think we keep running into. This is counterproductive to what the church actually wants to do. But so much, it's like the monkey's fist in the cookie jar. Grabs the cookie and won't let it go and can't get their hand out. And the church does that so many times. They're so greedy. They have to do Prop 8. They have to fight against marriage. They can't just let it ride.
They fight the ERA. They fight the civil rights movement. They fight, Prop 8, right? It's just, it's got to be the church's culture and the church's way. And it's just killing the church. It's literally killing the church in 2022. The church is dying.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think Poelman prophetically saw it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just also want to say that when I met with Elder Holland, I had 2 lunches with him, and I'll never forget the quote he said when I asked him my question in the first lunch. I said, do you want people like me in the church? People who doubt, people who have questions, people who are progressive or liberal. And he literally said to me privately, and my brother was with me, he said, I want 100,000 John and Joel DeLynns in this church. He said, I want the tent as wide and as big as possible. That's what they'll tell a progressive or a liberal privately behind the scenes. But then he turned around and gave his famous Book of Mormon talk, literally like the general conference after I met with him, where he said, if you're going to leave the church, you have to crawl over around the Book of Mormon, which he probably couldn't have given a more alienating, tent narrowing talk, than that. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I was planning on recording up here in the next few weeks or months, where he's given in the last few years a couple of talks aimed at more of a judicial audience about religious rights and what religious rights mean, that I think is a kind of I'm not a fan. But in the last few months, he has come out and said some things that are more progressive and I think are helping. So Maybe he's having a turn of heart. The oaks has softened his heart and it's grown 3 sizes. I don't know.
Carah, were you going to say something?
I just wanted to say that, I mean, what is the doctrine or the ideas around the light of Christ that we all kind of grew up on, that everyone has like a portion of truth? It's that whole, that keyboard analogy of Brad Wilcox's, that idea that all these other cultures, all these other religions, they all have a portion of truth, but when you come here, you get a full play on the full piano, you get the fullness of Christ. And like you guys were saying, that's a lovely idea that like we have these, that like we're inviting, but and when you actually get down to it, it's very condescending, it's very like culturally genocidally like it doesn't actually fill me or anybody when actually played out in the way that the church plays it out, whether it's through, missionaries going and changing people's cultural beliefs, going into Native American communities, substituting what they believe, what they hold sacred for, this new kind of men in 1950s business suits, like like whatever it is, that just doesn't feel like we are giving the light of Christ the real due that it has. If Hindus have the light of Christ, if Buddhists have the light of Christ, you don't need to be having such orthodox language, such small tent language. But that's the only way the church will survive, by telling people that this is where you have to have these covenants. And I think that's what it always comes back to for the church. If you guys would agree, like that's what that talk was talking about earlier, is that's why they needed to add the word covenants, because the light of Christ is useless unless you're actually baptized, going through our ordinances, paying your tithing, and receiving these covenants. You know what I mean?
All right, wait, hold on. I have to shout out. LeVar, is that you? LeVar just gave us $19.99.
$20. Thanks for the super chat, LeVar.
A dear old LeVar, I think is how it's pronounced. Yes, LeVar is a dear old friend who is a fan of Mormon Expression for a lot of years. Nice to see you again.
Love you, LeVar. John, I know you want to run on, but I'm
keep going.
I'm mind blown because I'm reading this quote that we just played. They literally exalt conformity as a good thing. This quote says, therefore, as we live the gospel and participate in the church, the conformity we require of ourselves and of others should be according to God's standards. They're pro-conformity. Like, don't they have any PR Madison Avenue people? That's like being pro. That's just being pro-cringe. Nobody should ever say they're pro-conformity, ever.
You would think.
Even if you're pro-conformity, you don't say it.
I'll do whatever you do, John.
We're all individuals. I'm not. That's a Life of Brian quote. I don't know if you
Okay, the next part of the speech picks up just where we left off with our third quote. So, and this is another one where there's a large section that you're going to hear in the unedited talk first that was edited out of the final one. So number 4.
And for those who are watching, I put the text of what was included in the original talk on the left-hand margin, and then I tried to put what it was replaced by in the right-hand margin, just as a visual aid. Hopefully that'll be helpful to some. All right, we'll roll the tape.
Standards.
The orthodoxy upon which we insist must be founded in fundamental principles and eternal law, including free agency and the divine uniqueness of the individual,
and direction given by those organized in the church.
It is important.
Okay, so literally they got rid of free agency and they replaced it with direction given by those authorized in the church. I just had to pause that. Is that right? Did I hear that right, John Larsen?
That's exactly right. The edited out free agency and replaced it with direction of the church.
And this is really scary, John Larsen. Do you know about what happened in the past couple of weeks with Bednar and free agency?
Oh no, what's happening?
Okay, we'll finish this. We'll finish this clip and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so far, free agency is on the decline and direction given by the authorized church is on the rise. Okay, let's keep going.
Therefore, to know the difference between eternal gospel principles, which are unchanging, universally applicable, and cultural norms, which may vary with time and circumstance.
Ooh, boy. That is really something, because the people authorized in the church to replace your free agency, basically, those aren't informed by cultural norms. Never, not once. That's what a wild thing to say.
Indeed. Did we include the part where the next one where it's untidy and unorganized?
I'm not sure that made it into this clip.
All right, well, I can read it. Right.
Yeah,
The next thing he says is the source of this perspective. I mean, this is the unedited version. So the cultural norms, which may vary with time and circumstance. So he made that distinction. The source of this perspective is found in the scriptures and may appear to be presented in a rather unorganized and untidy format. The Lord could have presented the gospel to us in a manual, systematically organizing it by subject, perhaps using examples and illustrations. However, the eternal principles and divine law of God are revealed to us through accounts of individual lives in a variety of circumstance and conditions.
That is good stuff. He's basically saying the Lord could have given us really specific manual of how to do everything, but he kind of allows us to figure it out using our free agency. And so we're sometimes going to get it right, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong, and it's going to change, which is, I think, to your point, Carah, is exactly what the church has been doing for 200 years, is sort of drawing lines in the sand, then cultural waves hit, and then they have to redraw the lines in the sand. Is that right? Is that what you were saying, Carah?
Yeah, I mean, that's the church's MO is, again, going back to my rant at the beginning, everything about why I do what I do is about approaching dogmatic systems from a place of agitation to make them better for the people that they're supposed to serve. And if they're always doing it in secret and they're not telling the membership of the church where they're redrawing those cultural lines, we're all stuck in a place of furthering our taking crazy pills, basically feeling gaslit by leaders who are not giving us the fullest information. Just like that said, just that we are taking direction from those authorized without going onto our basic instincts of what we know is right and what is wrong, whether it's the church fighting against like civil rights and us knowing that it's wrong. Like, everything has to come back to, where are those cultural lines being changed? What are the reasons behind why they're changing? Is it because they are divinely inspired and we truly are getting like God's messengers, or is it because they're needing to play catch up from a culture and a country and a world that's moving at a forward pace towards gaining more rights for the most amount of equity for the most amount of people? It's asking those questions, why the church is changing, and what the reasons behind what are the reasons the church is changing versus what have we been told the reasons that they're changing are. That's what it always comes back down to me. So
love it. John, are you going to be mentioning the Blacks in the Priesthood essay in reference to what we just read? I don't want to steal your thunder.
You mean one they wrote recently?
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if there ever was a Mormon prophet, it's Ronald Poelman, because when everybody knows that when the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, denied both the priesthood and temple ordinances to Black people or people of color for like 150 years, there were multiple signed First Presidency statements calling it doctrine. So clearly it was perceived as doctrine. And what Poelman was trying to do was trying to say, hey, everyone, sometimes there's going to be certain things that everybody kind of believes, or even the church leaders believe, call it folklore if you want to, but over time we need to understand that we see through a glass darkly, and that many of those things that maybe we thought were doctrine or policy, maybe that we thought were doctrine, were actually policy, or if we want to use the temple's own phrase, the philosophies of men mingled with scripture. And we need to be able to let those things go and realize that they were just policies that can change, or even folklore, and they're not doctrine. And so Poelman was foreseeing the justification that was ultimately used when the Race and the Priesthood essay came out, trying to walk back all those prophetic utterances that the Black priesthood ban was doctrinal, right? And so Poelman, like you said, John, earlier, Poelman was like giving the church a huge gift of an opportunity to seed into the culture flexibility around culture versus doctrine. And then it was like the church took one step forward with Ronald Poelman and then 10 steps backwards
Yeah.
with their editing of his talk.
Well, it kind of has to. I do want to read before we kind of go a little bit further what they replaced that paragraph with. So the rather organized and untidy format that he talked about, the edited version says a necessary perspective is gained by studying and pondering the scriptures. That's all they have there. And I've contemplated this word ponder as used by the church for a long time, trying to figure out what in the world they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it finally dawned on me that ponder is exactly the opposite of study. So normally when you take a book, especially a book that is ancient, that has been around for a long time and been through many languages and translations, if you're going to study said book, you'd have a dictionary on your desk. You'd have commentaries by professors and those who understand it. You'd try to understand its context, its history. You'd want to know how people who originally got that book understood it. You'd want to know how it was understood through history. You'd want to know about different interpretations of it. All those things that I just said are exactly what the church does not want you to do. It wants you to ponder. I first kind of kicked over this rock when I was still a member of the church, and the last calling I had, I was the adult Sunday school teacher, and I realized that I was talking to rooms full of people who'd been in the church their whole lives, and they knew nothing about the Book of Mormon, not even the most basic things. And I thought, Ezra Taft Benson has been teaching that we should read this thing daily for the last 10 years, 15 years. How can it be that there's millions of people who believe that this is the most important book ever written? That it is the restored gospel unperverted by the Catholic Church or anything else. How can people be so ignorant of what it actually says? And this is why they have to edit these talks. Because what Ronald Poelman did is he showed you where the thread was. And if you start pulling that thread, it all comes apart. I push back on anybody like you, John, who pushes for reform in the church, to say the church cannot reform because there's nothing behind it. There's no place for it to land. Once you start pulling apart all the facade and the lies and the misrepresentation and the corporate culture and obedience and all that kind of stuff, there's nothing more. So the church has to stop any questioning of its absolute authority, because without absolute authority, the whole system falls apart.
Well said.
Yeah. Beautiful. John, I when we were talking about the erasure of free agency, there's a clip of a Davis County stake presidency member talking about free agency as it relates to Mormon missions and the choice to go on a mission. Did you ever hear that? Did you happen to hear that, John?
Well, I saw bouncing around in the Mormon sphere the last couple of weeks, saying that missionaries no longer have a choice whether or not they could go on missions.
Yeah, he basically, and this is a visual of the guy. Not to pick on him. There's a Mormon Stories video that we'll include in the show notes. But basically, he's quoting Bednar, who I believe is quoting, Packer or someone else that he used to follow. But the basic idea is that once you get baptized at 8, you no longer have free agency. Free agency gets replaced with moral agency. And moral agency means you do exactly what the church leaders tell you to do.
Well, when you go to the temple, you pledge your time, talents, resources, and everything which the Lord has blessed you for the building up of the kingdom of God, which is interpreted today as the church.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, there's another part, about a paragraph down or so, that he says in the unedited version, through scripture study, we may learn eternal principles and how to distinguish them from and relate them to institutional resources. So he's riffing on the idea that you can use the scriptures as kind of a proof if the church is going off basis. Like, for example, if there's a lot of people talking about guns in church, then you can look at your New Testament and say, well, I don't see a lot of this in the New Testament. Maybe we're doing something that's cultural. as opposed to something that's the gospel. And then the edited version says, through scripture study, we may learn eternal principles and how to relate them to institutional resources. Again, substituting the institution. And, maybe it's, if we take that view that Ron Poelman has, which I think is kind of idealistic, that there is a gospel out there and there's the church that is the Platonic form of the church. For the church, there is no distinction. They are not either Platonic or Aristotelian. They are the form. They are the truth. They are God.
Yeah, absolutely. The church,
All right.
The church tells you to obey God, but how do you know what God says? You listen to the church leaders, and they'll tell you what God says.
And if you can corner them, I've done it before. You can get them to admit that even if they say something that's untrue, and you obey them, then you're in the cover. But then the question is, then how did the apostasy ever happen? Because even if the church leaders in the early Christian era substituted false teachings for the gospel, we have established that the membership stays faithful and their ordinances stay true, even if that happens. So the church has painted itself into a doctrinal corner hardcore, and they will do everything they can to get around this, because the restoration depends on the idea that they've gotten it all right. Because if they don't have it all right, then they don't even recognize what the restoration is. If they can't tell, the leaders of the church can't tell truth from their own emotions, then we're all hosed. Or maybe, just maybe, God never takes white men and puts them as his spokespeople. Maybe that's just something that white men tell you.
Brilliant. Yeah, because I mean, any missionary who comes knocking on like a investigator's door would say, like, you know what, Christ, you probably know about him, but the church went into apostasy and it's been restored now. And then the line that you hear over and over again, that the prophets, leaders will never lead the church astray. Stay in the boat. We cannot and will not lead you astray. But I like your point, John Larsen, to the very people at the beginning of like Jesus's church, if he had a church at all. You're saying that. Sorry, reiterate your point one more time for me while I make the connections.
Oh, I've long since forgotten.
All right. You guys know what I mean. I just think that that's really interesting, that everything is based on a restoration of, these covenants, these ordinances, and the idea that they can never be lost. But while we are actively saying, hey, these might not be exactly what we thought they were, these men, these positions of authority, the way that we always have to constantly be downgrading what priesthood authority means, like what priesthood blessing should look like, what prophetic leadership looks like. The entire experience over the last 30 years of my life is constantly downgrading what it means to live in a restoration. I think that's worth admitting.
Shortening the garments, shortening church service, taking things out of the temple ceremony, reversing, positions on science in the age of the earth. As science and as time advances, the gospel shrinks. There's like there's an inverse relationship, a direct inverse relationship between time and science and evidence and existing canon or doctrine.
There's an inverse correlation between like access to like high-speed internet and like church attendance. And
really quickly, Colby, shout out to Colby Reddish. He did the work that I was thinking to do. I wanted to recalculate $15,000 into 2022 dollars, and he came up with the calculation, which is $43,000. So basically, thanks, Colby, he's reminding us that the church paid $43,000 to damage itself, to poke itself in the eye.
Yes,
that's your tithing. That's your tithing at work.
Since this is probably a good place to is, I know there's people out there who struggle with missionaries who are trying to badger them into joining the church, or church authorities who are trying to get them to not lose their testimony, or family members. I'm going to give you a tool that you can use to shut them down. So you say to them, okay, we need to follow the gospel. What's the gospel? And they say, well, the gospel is the truth. So your answer is, you mean like science? And then you can argue with them for a while, you know, blah, 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 blah. But here's the meat of it. You say, okay, so the gospel is really doctrines and commandments, right? Oh, yeah, it's doctrines and commandments. And those are contained in the scriptures, the teachings of the prophets, yes? Yeah. Well, I think it's very important that if I'm going to join your church, or I'm going to continue my activity in your church, or I'm going to call myself a Mormon, that I understand what those doctrines and commandments are. Will you please give me a list? And it's proof positive to me that you're in a cult if the most important thing is to live by a set of principles or commandments that does not exist. You're in a cult.
Yeah,
because you can never do it, because they can swap out what they consider to be doctrine at any time, what they consider to be a principle. There is no there and if you listen to the church carefully over the past, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, they never identify anything as doctrine. Look at the proclamation of the family. They carefully crafted the language around that, so everybody in the church would assume it was doctrine, but it never was defined as such, so they could weasel out, because they've had to weasel out of most everything. I have thrown this gauntlet down more than once to apologists or believers. I contend there is not a single doctrine of the church that has not been modified, and no one has yet shown me one that has not. All right, should we go on to quote 5?
Amen. All right, this is the final quote, is that right? Is this the final quote?
This is the last one we have recording of. Yep.
Okay. And again, is this another one where he says something really awesome and then in the edited version they take it out? Is that right?
Yes, indeed.
All right. So the text should be on the left, and what you should be hearing is the good stuff first, and then you won't hear the silence. But here we go.
Every church member has not only the opportunity, right, and privilege to receive a personal witness regarding gospel principles and church practices, but the need and obligation to obtain such assurance by exercising his free agency, thereby fulfilling one purpose
of his mortal probation. So basically, again, it's another quote saying we all have our free agency. And that to exercise our free agency is the fulfillment of the very purpose of why we were sent to this earth in our mortal probation.
The
right?
obligation, he says, that we have free agency, we have the power of discernment, and it is our individual obligation to verify and validate that this is the true church. We are not allowed just to go on and say, well, everybody else is doing it. We have a need and an obligation to attain such assurance by exercising free agency. Because if one doesn't exercise free agency, then that's Satan's plan, thereby fulfilling one purpose to his mortal probation. And let me belabor the Satan's plan thing, that Satan wanted everybody in Mormon theology, everyone to follow the gospel without choice and without agency. And they wouldn't have an opportunity to decide if they want to do it themselves. They'd just be forced into it. And one of the ways you force your beliefs on people is you get them as children. And if you want to be really sinister, what you do is you define children as adults. So I think it's ironic that the church will make fun of the Catholic Church or other denominations for practicing infant baptism, because they practice baptism at 8 years old, when kids are no longer kids. It's just, it blows one's mind.
Yeah, if you've ever lived in the mission field like I have, and you ever had a convert in your ward and they're scheduled the same time, like a 60-year-old woman or a 30-year-old man are scheduled to get baptized at the same time as the 8-year-olds in the ward. It's in the stake. It's really weird and embarrassing to be like, I don't feel like you guys are like on the same level of like understanding what you're committing to. Just for an example.
Well, and it's abusive to children. It did cause me much distress. Because as a 12-year-old, I may not have had as much self-control as Boyd K. Packer thought I should. And I was clearly under the understanding from listening to the conference that was a personal flaw, and I was not a good person, right?
Are you saying your little factory was working in overdrive, John Larsen?
John, why do you always want to talk about that sort of way? I'm talking about sacred principles here, and you're making fun of it. I mean, that of course we're talking about touching yourself, but other things like that. And to me, it's not so much as in the action, just as much as human desire enters in when somebody hits puberty. And we should go through all the talks, the miracle forgiveness and the Boyd K. Packer talks that actually just condemn human sexuality and suggest that if you even have desire, then you have not controlled your mind and you're under the influence of the devil. They're really sinister teachings, but they're that way by that design. Let's be clear. They want broken people because they sell medicine to fix broken people. They sell medicine that never fixes broken people. For years, I have been listening to the anti-abortion right say that we are under the condemnation of God because abortion was legal in the United States. Now that it's no longer legal, are any of the Christians ever going to say, well, glory be, we are no longer under the condemnation of Christ. Hallelujah, we've transcended to the other side. What's the odds that anybody is going to say that? It's close to zero, because they always have to have a battle. They always have to have enemies. They always have to have people, be they devils or demons or Democrats or whatever, socialists, communists, whatever thing they want to make up, that is always the enemy. They always have to have an enemy. And the number one enemy, of course, is apostates. And they don't want any of that to come into here.
But I'm just surprised that the other enemy is free agency. Like all of us that did Mormon Plan of Salvation 101, it all began by learning about the war in heaven, that Lucifer wanted to force us all to do what was right, that Jesus presented an alternative plan, or Jesus presented God's plan where we had the right to choose. And that was the very purpose that we were sent down here. And I'm just so baffled at the decade after decade after decade denunciation and removal and canceling of free agency. The Mormon Church has canceled free agency, and it's the most anti-Mormon thing I've ever heard of, as someone who is accused of being an anti-Mormon. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, all I do, John, is just take the Mormon stuff and read it back to them. I mean, I'm supposed to be this big critic of the church, and I am, but all I do is just read the things the church has published. Just open the books. You don't have to. When I had my faith crisis, I refused to read anti-Mormon literature in the first couple of years, but I found it all right there in the hallowed halls of church history. It really is perverse. But you'll see people. Despotic people, manipulative people, almost always accuse their foes of doing whatever it is that they themselves do. So of course the church talks about free agency all the time, but doesn't really provide an avenue for it or a way to exercise it, or even give it any meaning or purpose.
Yeah, it's like they want to say we have free agency so that we feel like we're not in a cult and that we're autonomous beings, but then they want to stamp it out whenever they get nervous that if we actually use it, that we won't make the right decision that they want to force us to make.
Well, there's sometimes some Christians and evangelicals especially like to say that there really aren't any atheists, that there's nobody who really doesn't believe in God. Everybody secretly believes in God. I'll put forth a similar contention. I don't believe that any Christians really believe their religion at all. They don't act like it at all. They don't really. You find Christian nations and Christian states and stuff. It's all about all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the gospel. And I just don't think that people believe. It's like if people really believed that a 12 week old fetus was a person, they would have been burying them and giving them religious rights, but they weren't. They didn't care. They only care about it in terms of something that they have identified to be a religious principle today. And that's my problem with religion. I haven't found one that's appealing to me outside of Buddhism, which I don't think you can really count as a religion, because they're not consistent at all whatever religion you start getting that list of commandments and principles or whatever, it'll start deconstructing the whole thing. That's why they'll never do it. They'll never give it to you, because it's just it's like DNC 89, the word of wisdom. It's a mismatch of weirdness and nothingness and strangeness that nobody can even understand, let alone follow.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I say something?
Please.
Okay. So I love what you said, John Larsen, about like you can feed it back to, an LDS person exactly what their church is saying. And I think people like us, we have to give a little bit of grace to people who are not quite maybe up to reading Bednar's latest talk or hearing what the stake president had. Because I would have done the same thing, where I would have said, no, we absolutely believe in agency. But the kind of rhetoric that comes out of the church, you do kind of have to be at the forefront of understanding what is actually being taught about agency in real time to Latter-day Saints around the world. And so when that was a stake president, John, that said that you don't have a choice to serve a mission anymore, right?
It was a stake presidency member quoting Bednar. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So quoting Bednar. And at the time, I like to personify and satirize kind of arguments and the way that these problems break down within, LDS culture. And so I did a little skit, a little personification of what that actually sounds like. And I titled it, if your Mormon friends were being honest about missions, or something like that. And I did a back and forth. And I think ex-Mormons and people who are familiar with this got it. But the LDS people on Facebook lost their minds at me. And so can I just read something really quick about, because we were saying like we should be able to choose if we want to serve missions and have that type of, but even articulating that when you get baptized, the church is saying you have now given away your agency now to then serve the church. And that's what my skit, my TikTok explained. But even somebody said to me, completely unself-aware, again, this is what John Larsen was talking about, where like they can't even like come to terms with what they just said. Like, we're saying the same thing. Like, it's a form of indoctrination. It's a form of like giving up your agency for the church. And this person said to me, no, we get baptized young in our church, but every week God asks us if we want to continue with him, starting at age 8, right? We do this through the renewal of our baptismal covenants as we partake in the sacrament. Each week we reevaluate, and each week we re-up our covenants with the Lord. So I'm thinking of an 8-year-old every Sunday with their family, a 9-year-old. Like, I'm making the exact same point that they're making, right? And they're saying we accept mission calls not because we made our first covenants at age 8, but because we renewed that covenant the previous Sunday. And I'm like, we're saying the same thing. I'm like, you gave up your agency to serve a mission. So then by the time you are 18 and 19 deciding what to do with your life, it is a steady course of like indoctrination of giving up that agency and replacing it with God's will for you. Like, that's what's so fascinating. Like, we're both saying that that's bad. Like, it's bad, but when done in the context of the way that church wants it, because the church is asking you to do it, because like the Poelman talk was replaced with, because the people in authority, because that is the right thing to do. It's the point that I make in my TikTok. Therefore, we can just replace our thoughts and our desires and our feelings of what we should and shouldn't be doing with what the people in authority should say. Like, I know Mormons they know that that's wrong. That's everybody lost their minds at me in my comment section. Like, how dare you say that people don't have the agency, while they very much admit that we're just re-upping every single week and replacing our agency with God's. I'm like, we're saying the same thing here, you guys.
I think you make a great point. And I would push back even further and say, well, if children taking the sacrament is a reminder that they get a decision to renew their relationship with Jesus Christ, why do they have the children take the sacrament from the time they're in their infancy? I've seen people stuff that bread into 9-month-old kids' maws. So like,
right.
It's obvious what's happening. If you take a step back, they are taking these children and spend the first 8 years of their life taking that sacrament every day. So it's habituated and unquestioned and just what you do. So there is no agency in it. And we've all witnessed in church and probably had it happen to us where you're like, Mom, I don't want to take the sacrament this week. You will take the sacrament this week or you'll be grounded, because it's your agency. It's all a farce.
Yeah, and people love to argue like, no, I know tons of people who didn't do X, didn't go serve a mission, they fell off, and we don't treat them any differently. I'm like, then what is the entire purpose of going to church and saying that like these are these are the important covenants that we're supposed to be coming to earth to make? That like you can't say both things at the same time. You can't say like we don't judge people who don't do these things. We don't judge people who do choose not to serve a mission while also saying that these covenants are the most important thing that you come down to earth to go use your agency to participate in, and then say also if they don't, we're just like totally cool and fine if they don't also as well. Like they really have a hard time speaking outside of their mouths when there aren't people like pointing out their flaws in their logic, which is what we're here for.
Okay, so I have kind of my after notes, my summing up points here. And we've made this point multiple times here. If the church had left this talk in place, it would have covered up a lot of their sins over the last 25 years. I'm reminded of all those disaster movies, where there's like a wild-haired professor. He was an A-list actor like 10 years ago, and now he's like aging out a little bit. And he's the wild scientist who's got a crazy theory, but he knows the disaster that's going to come, and people just won't listen to him. And then there's the maniacal congressperson who shuts him down and won't listen to. Then the big disaster happens, and you get the big payoff where he's like, I told you so. And that's like the point of the movie. This could be one of those movies, right? You could have Elder Ron Poelman warning the church about how things are going to unravel over the next 25 years, and the church didn't pay any attention. Now, we made this point at the beginning. It's worth making again. Poelman himself claims that he edited the talk for clarity, and he continued as a faithful church person and died in full fellowship. Like there was no sign ever that he was either punished for this or that he regretted what happened. So I don't necessarily want to erase full culpability. He was a very intelligent man. He was an attorney, and he knew what every word was happening. So while I think this is a great talk, I don't want to necessarily give him a free pass into heaven because he was involved in both sides. What the church did to him or said to him to make him do it, I have no idea. Did it break his heart? I have no idea. I hope so. But I just don't want to push anything into this man that is not warranted. We can't really access his psyche. But his first talk is brilliant. And it's what the church needed to hear. And the church continues to need to hear. John.
Yeah. And, him saying that he made the changes reminds me of Uchtdorf after he's kicked out of the first presidency, making that public statement that he was super happy and fully in support of the demotion. That comes with the job, bro.
Right.
Being a company man, that comes with the job. You swallow when they tell you to swallow.
Yeah, Starlight's clearly in love with Homelander. Okay, so the next point, the distinction that Poelman makes is fairly universal. And I think this is widely applicable, not just to the church, but many things in our lives, like, say, political ideologies, that we have to be careful as human beings when we start taking the instance of things and confuse them with the Platonic form of them. Now, I, of course, don't believe in the Platonic form of things. So I think that that's part of the whole problem. It's part of a flaw in human thinking. We are what we are. We can try to improve, but there's not some idealized state out there that we're trying to get to. But I think that if we could separate, for example, that the United States, its history, can be both encouraging and inspiring and despicable and awful simultaneously, that things like countries and politics and religions are much more complicated, nuanced, and dirty than we want them to be. I think following Poelman's advice and recognizing that culture influences things and the flaws, and it's messy and it's broken up, helps us to regain the humanity of the church. The best part about the church, I've always said, is the people in it, and that we were striving to create Zion. And for us, that meant our ward and our stake and the people who lived on the left of us and the people who lived on the right of us and our community. And Zion wasn't something that was dictated by the correlation committee. And the more they tried to squeeze the correlation committees, the more, is this a line from Star Wars? The more you squeeze, the more rebels will fall out of your hands or whatever. And the church did the same thing. And not recognizing their own deficiencies, I think, is terrible. And in this age that is very polemic, in the United States, we're very divided. We're in a fighty sort of mode. We should all take Ron Poelman's advice and recognize that the ideals that we fight for are not the instance of what happens. Because let's take something as simple as the political views of the United States, the blue versus red. There's three possibilities. Either the red side is right and the blue side is wrong, the blue side is right and the red side is wrong, or they're both wrong. Now, I'm not a betting man, but if I were going to bet historically on which one is most likely, I would say it's most likely that they're both wrong. And historically, most movements have been wrong and get abandoned. It's human striving, hopefully, for something better. But if we realize that there's no ideology right now that is worth like attaching yourself to wholesale, like joining the church, like paying tithing, like doing that. If Mormons come to you and say, well, we believe in truth and we believe in community, say, I'm all in. Invite me to your ward parties. Invite me to your ward service projects. If we're helping people, I want to help. You don't have to write checks to Salt Lake to achieve that. And I think that's what Ron Poelman was hinting at. And that's why the church had to shut it down, because they need your money. It's expensive to run the church.
And they're $1 trillion church by this point. So you could argue they don't need our money, but they want followers. They want status. They want reputation. They probably want power at some level. And for all those reasons, they're going to keep. The war against free agency continues. We thought it was settled with Satan, with Lucifer and Jesus and the war in heaven, but the war on free agency very much continues in 2022.
And when you leave the church, there's others. There's other people who want your clicks and they want your attention and they want your shopping cart full and they want all that. And it's in human nature to exploit other humans. And we have to be wary of that and realize that these institutions are flawed, as Elder Poelman told us. So fantastic job, Ron Poelman. Great talk. Very inspiring. I encourage all people to read it. But this is, as I said in the beginning, this is propaganda. This is how it's done. This is how you engineer thoughts. This is how, in Noam Chomsky's language, this is how you manufacture consent. Because you pull out of any possibility the idea that the church could be anything but perfect. And then what you do is you go and say the church is not perfect, but then you make sure to act like it is. You know, and if anybody ever pulls that line out, like your mom, say, okay, give me an example. Oh, I don't worship the prophet. All right, tell me one thing wrong with him. If they can't do that, I'll give you two last litmus tests, and then we can be done. You know you're in a cult if you have a picture of the dear leader on your wall. You know you're in a fascist organization if your organization wants to restrict the movement of its citizens.
Check.
All right.
Check, John Larsen.
Hey, well, thanks for bearing with me and my no swear cast.
Did we make it? Did we make it all the way through without a swear?
Yeah, except for that one at the beginning.
Well, aside from that, Carah, you behaved.
Yeah, I'm relaxed. I'm fine. There's nothing to get upset about, just except for authoritarian structures gaining more power slowly but surely over time, and having everyone in their grasp not realize what they are eating until it's 30 years too late. So that's just like what it is. But like, do I need to swear about it? No. I'm just like, yeah. So I was in that church for a while, had some good times, had some bad. It is what it is.
It is what it is. It's very human. The Mormon church is very human. And I think for ex-Mormons, if we can realize that, we get upset at the pain and suffering it causes both in our own lives and the lives around us, and the destruction and all that it lays out, the wasteland it creates to prop up its own people. But it's not divine, nor is it satanic. It's just another human institution. And we realize the flaws are in us. Hopefully that can give us a little bit more grace and empathy, which of course I need as much or more than anybody for, everyone else. I've decided that we don't really need to like anybody. We really don't need to love anybody. You don't even need to tolerate anybody, but we all need to strive for empathy. That's what makes the world go around. See, if you find you don't like somebody, you find you don't like their position, then you need to get a little bit more empathy and try to understand where they're coming from. If we could all just do that, wow, how much better of a place this would be.
Get curious. Don't understand something? Why would somebody believe that thing? I wonder what's going on in their head. I wonder what shoes they've been walking around in. Let me try to get behind their eyeballs, what their brain's been firing off on. What's the downside of that? So the only difference is, I think all three of us sitting here at this trifecta, we all know what it's like to be participants in this system, and we know where it served us and we know where it doesn't. And all we're trying to do is just bring awareness of the massive gaping holes and the ways that it doesn't serve the people that, society at large, the people that we love, the people on the margins. John, you guys always like to say, like, yeah, the church was great for me. I was a white straight male in the church. A lot of ways, same ways with me. But when you adhere to a certain level of orthodoxy that is based a lot on a delusion, it's going to feed complexes in people to the highest degree, you could say, that are going to leave people on the margins, whether it's women or whatever else you want to label. It's going to leave people behind while they keep pressing forward with their orthodoxy and their adherence to things that, again, are just their delusions of men. They're societally informed. And if we don't have checks and balances, we don't have agitators, if we don't have ways to pull the curtain and see the man behind the curtain of what the church is, what that hive mind is actually really up to. If we don't do that on a regular basis as a church and as people who have left the church, nobody benefits. And everyone just gets kind of stuck in this apathy, which I am not about, So that's my piece on that. Can you hear my kids in the background, by the way?
It's time to let Carah go. I'll just add that if we're going to strive to have empathy for the church leaders, I'll say that it's a job I would never want. I would never want to be a LDS church prophet or first presidency member or apostle, because there are no good answers. I spent years trying to come up with a recommendation to the church that would help it improve in a healthy way that won't result in less butts in seats and less tithing. And I couldn't think of a single recommendation that would improve the church that wouldn't hurt the church. And so I don't envy them. But there's good news here. It's kind of a win-win. Either they listen to people like Ronald Poelman, they listen to people like John Larsen and Carah Burrell and others. They listen to TikTok, they listen to Mormon podcasts and YouTube and Sunstone and Dialogue, and they either listen and change and make it better, or they accelerate their own demise. So in that case, it is kind of a win-win. How's that for an optimistic note?
I hope so. It's just, I wish there wasn't as much collateral damage along the way as there is, but.
Well, we're doing our part to minimize that. And John Larsen, you and Carah Burrell, you are doing your part to help minimize the collateral damage. So shout out to both of you for coming on Mormon Stories and for all the great work you do. You, Carah, on Nuance Ho, check her out on Patreon and on YouTube, subscribe and donate. And John Larsen, you were decrying post-Mormon prophets that want clicks. We got you up to 123 subscribers on your YouTube channel. So you're a modern day apostate prophet. Sorry.
Well, I've hit the big times now. Cha-ching.
You get another, what is it, Carah? You need 1,000 to start monetizing, so we got to get another 877.
I don't think I'll ever monetize. But
John Larsen, do you want to start TikTok? I'm still coming up to Oregon sometime soon. So do you want me to teach you how to TikTok?
I'm not exactly sure, but I think that TikTok is owned by the Chinese military. So I kind of.
Yeah, everything's owned by the United States military. We're all effed, you know. Somebody's listening to us somewhere, but getting the message out on TikTok, it's a great way to go. I'm just offering up my services. I'm just saying.
I would look like the 60-year-old guy in roller skates on the dance floor. There's a point when you just have to age gracefully, and I think TikTok is below my aging gracefully line.
John Larsen, who I think is around your same age, just threw hands at you.
Yeah,
because you're on TikTok, John.
I'm ashamed. I'm lowering my head in shame that I.
At least you're not wearing a flat bill cap anymore. I kind of.
You cured me of that, Carah.
Wait, are you on TikTok? Isn't that like your minions and your staffers who do that for you? Like John's like a congressional guy. He's walking around with people following with crypt lords all the time, right?
No, I was around whispering in his ear, and I'm like, make sure to edit on this app. He does his own TikToks, or he did.
No, I actually I won't lie to you. I did install TikTok because my kids kept saying, "Hey, you were on TikTok," so I had to float it to see what was being, because people put me up there sometimes. They always speed me up, like as if I'm not maniac enough.
Carah.
You gotta put me on fast speed.
That's Carah.
Yeah.
I figured as much.
That's my free advice. If anyone wants to go on TikTok, you have to make sure people finish the videos if you want to get into the algorithm. So I got to make you a tiny bit faster. So you do sound like a maniac. I apologize. But they went viral. Can't argue with results.
Well, the last thing I'm going to say is that, it's been a real honor, John Larsen, to have you do this monthly episode on Mormon Stories. We do pay John Larsen for his time, as well as we pay Carah, and that's through the Mormon Expression Fund. So I'm going to go ahead and post into the comments a link to the Mormon Expression page, which you can click on the donate button and become a monthly donor. John Larsen needed a better laptop so he could have better internet and video processing, and so we just ordered him a laptop today. We've upgraded his video and his audio, and we've got other improvements we want to make. And so we thank everyone who has been supporting the John Larsen Mormon Expression Project. Please click on that link in the show notes or in the comments. Become a monthly donor if you want to see John Larsen continue. And we were so fortunate to be a part of resurrecting Mormon Expression, the Mormon Expression podcast catalog, and putting it up on Spotify. And for those of you who don't know, there's an amazing podcast that by many people's estimates is way better than Mormon Stories. Is that true, John Larsen? Is Mormon Expression?
It wasn't better. It's just briefer.
Some would say briefer is better. Anyway, check out Mormon Expression podcast on Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the How to Build a Transoceanic Vessel. We need to do a replay of that on Mormon Stories, John Larsen, don't you think?
We could play it with commentary and play it and stop it.
Exactly.
Like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 sort of thing.
Let's plan that in the coming weeks or months. I think that would be brilliant.
Yeah, repurposing that is exactly what people actually want, because I made a TikTok that's literally 1 minute long where I consolidated as much as I could into a TikTok in like a role play. One of my most popular TikToks of all time. People love arguing about how you build boats. So very fascinating topic, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, and John Larsen, I know we're kind of drawing out the end of this episode, but I'm pulling up the statistics right now to Mormon Expression. And as of today, How to Build a Transoceanic Vessel is the number one listened to episode. 5,601 times people have listened to episode 276 of Mormon Expression podcast. Do you know what the number 2 would be, John Larsen? Do you want to guess?
Well, I can't guess because you've got it right there on screen.
Can you read it?
How I know beyond a shadow of a doubt the church isn't true.
Yep. And then number 3 is John Says Goodbye. That's because it's the last episode, so everybody's going to download that. Top 10 things you would expect to see if the church were actually true. These are some great titles, John Larsen. Top 10 goofiest things in the Doctrine and Covenants.
That was hard to narrow it down to 10. It's all goofy.
Top 10. My other favorite is top most problematic areas for Mormon apologists. Oh my gosh. I took notes on it. I want to make my own episode around that subject.
That's number 10, Carah. That's number 10.
It's so good. Everyone go listen to that one.
And I still out there, if any of them want to come out and tell me how I'm wrong, I would love it.
Yeah. Anyway, check out Mormon Expression. You'll be glad you did, as if there isn't enough podcasting content out there. And again, please, thank you for everyone who supports Mormon Stories, Mormon Expression. Carah, I just have to say, it's so lovely to have you on Mormon Stories.
So lovely to be here. I mean, we're only a couple miles apart, but still, it's really nice. Thanks.
Let's get tacos one of these days.
All right. I'll bring my son. I don't have any childcare.
That's fine.
So, yeah.
I love Callahan.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right. You're the best. Everyone support Nuanso on Patreon and on YouTube and on TikTok. John Larsen, you're the best. Check out John Larsen's new YouTube channel. John, do you know what the next topic is, or are you going to keep us in suspense?
For my YouTube channel or for this one?
For this episode.
It has to be suspense because I haven't decided yet. I've got a three bouncing around in my head.
All
but
right.
We will see you next week, and I will tell you guys what it is way too late, so it's hard for you to prepare.
All right. Thanks, John Larsen. Thanks, Carah.
Great.
And thanks to everyone who joined us today on Mormon Stories podcast. We appreciate your comments on the live stream. Thanks to everyone who makes this possible. Thanks to Maven, who is behind the scenes, moderating the comments, doing the time codes and show notes. Shout out to Gerardo, who always does the thumbnails and helps produce episodes. And of course to Jen Camp, the wonderful Jen Camp, who is serving as a director of operations. And then of course we have a wonderful board, and we're just so grateful for the Open Stories Foundation and for everyone who makes it possible. Anyway, be kind to each other, love each other, be good to each other. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. Take care, everybody.